She asked to join the mission. They laughed until her classified file crashed the system. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March of 1943, typed on War Department stationery, folded 3 times into a cream envelope that still smelled faintly of pipe smoke. Margaret Elaine Dowd, 27, read it twice at her kitchen table in Covington, Kentucky, before she set it down and looked out the window at the Ohio River, which was running gray and fast with snowmelt. The letter was not an acceptance. It was not an assignment. It was a list of instructions for how to formally withdraw her application from the Army Signal Intelligence Service, which she had submitted 11 weeks earlier, and which had apparently caused enough confusion in the offices at Arlington Hall that someone senior had decided it was easier to write her a politely worded removal than to process the file through normal channels. She read the withdrawal instructions. She did not follow them. Margaret Dowd had grown up in the 3rd house south of the railroad depot in Covington, the second of 4 children, the only one who could work a cipher before she turned 14. Her father, Robert Dowd, was a machinist at the Standard Oil refinery. Her mother taught arithmetic at the elementary school on Holman Avenue. Margaret had studied mathematics at the University of Cincinnati from 1934 to 1938, one of 7 women in a department of 43 students, and had graduated with honors in her field. She spent the 4 years following graduation teaching secondary school geometry in Covington while working weekend code problems in a notebook she kept in the drawer next to her bed. She had not told anyone about the notebook, not her family, not the other teachers at the school. When the Signal Intelligence Service began recruiting mathematically trained personnel in late 1942, Margaret sent her application directly to Arlington Hall in Arlington, Virginia, along with 3 letters of reference and 14 pages of original cipher analysis she had produced independently over the preceding 2 years. The 14 pages represented a method she had developed for identifying frequency drift patterns in multi-key polyalphabetic substitution ciphers. She had worked out the core of it on a Saturday in November 1941, sitting at the kitchen table with a pencil and a ream of graph paper. And she had spent the following 14 months refining the mathematics until she was certain it was right. The first recruiter who reviewed her file sent it back with a handwritten note stapled to the cover sheet. The note said the position required field-capable personnel. Margaret was not field-capable, the note said, because she was a woman. The note recommended she consider the clerical support track. She did not apply for the clerical support track. She resubmitted her original application to a second office at Arlington Hall. Included the 14 pages of cipher analysis again. Added 2 more pages she had completed in the intervening 3 weeks. The second office processed the file for 7 weeks before someone noticed the gender listed on the intake form. A different recruiter forwarded it to the Personnel Division with a recommendation for administrative transfer. The administrative transfer produced the withdrawal letter that arrived in March. Margaret Dowd put the withdrawal letter in the drawer next to her bed, next to the notebook. She wrote to a woman named Agnes Meyer Driscoll. Agnes Driscoll was 55 years old in 1943, had been working in naval cryptanalysis since 1918, and had broken more Japanese code systems by that point than almost anyone alive. Margaret did not know Agnes Driscoll personally. She had read about her in a 2-paragraph notice in a mathematics journal and had tracked down a mailing address through the Department of the Navy's Civilian Employee Directory. She wrote a 4-page letter explaining her frequency drift method and asking, specifically and plainly, whether Agnes Driscoll thought it had merit. Agnes Driscoll wrote back in 9 days. The reply was 3 sentences long. It said the method had merit. It said Margaret should contact a man named Colonel William Friedman at the Signal Intelligence Service. It said Margaret should tell him Agnes Driscoll recommended she do so. Colonel William Friedman was the chief cryptanalyst for the United States Army and had spent the previous 2 decades building the code-breaking apparatus that the Signal Intelligence Service operated out of Arlington Hall. He received Margaret's letter in April of 1943. He read it on a Wednesday morning. He read the 14 pages of cipher analysis the same afternoon. He passed the 14 pages to 3 members of his technical staff without explanation and asked them to review the mathematics independently. All 3 came back to him by Friday. They said the method was sound. They said the frequency drift approach she had identified could reduce the average time required to break a multi-key message by somewhere between 30 and 40%, depending on the cipher family. They said they had not seen the approach documented in any existing literature. They said whoever developed it had either extensive professional training in the field, access to classified materials they shouldn't have, or an unusual capacity for working out problems from first principles. Margaret Dowd had none of the classified materials. She had the notebook. Colonel Friedman requested Margaret's personnel file from the administrative division. He reviewed it on a Saturday morning. He found the first rejection note, the second rejection, and the withdrawal letter all filed in sequence. He made 3 phone calls on the following Monday. By Wednesday of that week, Margaret Dowd had a new letter on War Department stationery, this one inviting her to report to Arlington Hall no later than May 15, 1943, for an in-person evaluation and skills assessment. She arrived on May 10th. Arlington Hall was a converted girls' school in Arlington, Virginia, requisitioned by the Army in 1942. The main building was a red brick Georgian structure that still had jump ropes in a storage closet off the gymnasium, and chalk murals faded on the courtyard asphalt. By May of 1943, it housed more than 1,000 people, working across 3 shifts in rooms that had been converted from classrooms and dormitory wings. Margaret checked in at the main desk and was directed to wait in a room off the east corridor that smelled of floor wax and burned coffee. She waited 4 hours and 11 minutes before anyone came for her. The evaluation was administered by 2 men from Colonel Friedman's technical staff. They gave her a typed cipher problem in the morning, 3 pages of intercept traffic, and told her she had 6 hours. They came back in 3 hours and 40 minutes because someone at the front desk told them she had turned the pages over. She had finished in 2 hours and 50 minutes, but had used the remaining 50 minutes to expand her analysis into a second adjacent cipher family she had noticed embedded in the traffic, which had not been part of the original problem, and which she had included in a handwritten addendum on a notepad she'd brought from the waiting room. One of the evaluators read the addendum standing in the doorway. He did not say anything. He took the notepad and the original 3 pages and the 6 pages she had filled in and left. The other evaluator told her she could return to the waiting room. She waited another 90 minutes. Colonel Friedman came to the waiting room himself at 4:30 in the afternoon. He sat down across from her at the table and looked at her personnel file for approximately 90 seconds. Then he looked up and told her the addendum analysis on the secondary cipher family was accurate. He told her the embedded cipher she had identified was a known element in a Japanese naval traffic pattern that his team had been working to isolate for 11 weeks without success. He told her she had found it in 50 minutes while ostensibly waiting to have her primary work reviewed. He asked her when she could start. Margaret Dowd started June 2, 1943. She was assigned to a team working Japanese diplomatic traffic under a section chief named Captain Howard Reeves. Captain Reeves was 38 years old, a career Army officer, and he had a particular set of opinions about what kinds of personnel were suited to the precision work his section handled. He expressed those opinions to Colonel Friedman's aide 3 days before Margaret arrived. The aide wrote them down in a memorandum and forwarded it upward. Nobody responded to the memorandum. Margaret arrived on June 2nd and was given a desk in the corner of room 14, which faced a window that looked into a courtyard with a broken fountain that nobody had fixed. The desk had a wobble on the left rear leg that she corrected by folding a piece of cardboard from an empty supply box and wedging it underneath. She was given a stack of intercept traffic and no further instructions. She spent the first week reading everything on the desk, then everything in the 2 filing cabinets adjacent to the desk, then 3 additional filing boxes that were stacked in the hallway outside room 14 that nobody seemed to be actively working. Captain Reeves noticed this on the 6th day and told her the hallway boxes were not her assignment. She returned 2 of the 3 boxes to the hallway. She kept the 3rd one. The 3rd box contained 11 months of traffic from a Japanese diplomatic circuit that had been deprioritized in October 1942 when the section had shifted resources to a higher value target. Nobody had formally closed the circuit. Nobody had formally reopened it. It had simply sat in a box in the hallway for 8 months, generating more traffic that nobody was reading. Margaret Dowd began reading it on June 9, 1943. The circuit used a layered substitution system that had been partially broken by a different team the previous year. The partial break covered the outer layer. The inner layer had resisted analysis because it appeared to shift key parameters at irregular intervals, making frequency analysis unreliable. The existing team had documented this and concluded the inner layer used a machine-generated key sequence that could not be recovered without physical capture of the machine or its documentation. Margaret noted their conclusion. She did not agree with it. The key sequence was not machine-generated. The intervals were irregular because they were indexed to a calendar system, but not the Gregorian calendar. They were indexed to a modified version of the traditional Japanese calendar that incorporated the reign period of Emperor Hirohito alongside a supplementary counting system based on the 60-year cycle used in East Asian chronology. The key shifted on dates that were significant in that calendar, not on dates that appeared regular from a Western chronological perspective. She had it worked out in a notebook by July 14th. Not completely, but enough to reconstruct the key structure and begin decrypting the archive traffic. She presented the work to Captain Reeves on July 22nd. She had typed it up overnight, 12 pages, with a covering summary of 2 paragraphs. Captain Reeves read the covering summary. He set the 12 pages on his desk without reading them. He told her that the circuit had been formally deprioritized and that reassigning it was above his authority level. He told her she should return her attention to her primary assignment. She went back to her desk. She continued working the circuit from the 3rd box on her own time, before her shift began and after it ended. By September 3, 1943, she had decrypted 47 messages from the archive traffic, covering the period from January to October 1942. The messages documented a series of diplomatic communications related to Japanese naval coordination in the South Pacific. Several of the messages referenced troop movements and supply routes that had relevance to operations that were still active. She took the work to Colonel Friedman directly. She did not go through Captain Reeves. She was shown into Friedman's office at 11 in the morning on September 4th. She placed the 47 decrypted messages on his desk in sequence, along with a separate document that cross-referenced 3 of them to intercepts that his team had been unable to contextualize from other circuits. She stood across the desk and waited. Colonel Friedman read the cross-referenced document first. Then he read the first 8 decrypted messages in sequence. He stopped reading at page 11 and picked up his telephone and asked his aide to come in. When the aide arrived, Friedman handed him 4 of the messages and told him to take them immediately to a specific office whose name Margaret did not recognize, and to tell whoever was there that they came from Arlington Hall and that they were time-sensitive. The aide left. Friedman kept reading. He read for 40 minutes while Margaret stood across the desk. At the end of the 40 minutes, he set the last page down and looked at her and told her the cross-referenced messages she had tied together represented the most complete picture of Japanese naval coordination in the Solomons Corridor that his office had seen in 8 months of dedicated effort. He told her the calendar-based key structure she had identified had not been documented anywhere in the existing cryptanalytic literature. He told her the third box from the hallway was going to need to be treated as a high-priority asset going forward. Then, he told her she had done this work outside her assigned duties, without authorization, using materials she was not officially cleared to access. Margaret said that was correct. He told her that was a problem, and a commendation in the same package, and that he was going to have to figure out which of those applied first. The answer was the commendation. Captain Reeves received a memorandum on September 7th, informing him that Margaret Dowd was being moved from his section to a newly designated analytical unit that would report directly to Friedman's office. The memorandum did not use the words unauthorized or hallway boxes. It said that her analytical capabilities warranted a different deployment than her current assignment allowed. Captain Reeves did not respond to the memorandum. He did not speak to Margaret before she moved desks. The new unit was 6 people. Margaret was the only woman. 3 of the others had doctorates in mathematics from institutions that had not admitted women as students at the time she had applied. None of them said anything about this. They gave her the same stack of active intercept traffic they were all working and waited to see what she would do. She worked the calendar cipher through the rest of 1943 and into 1944, expanding the method to cover 4 additional Japanese diplomatic circuits that used variations of the same underlying structure. Each circuit required adaptation of the core approach because the calendar indexing shifted in detail from circuit to circuit, but the mathematical foundation held across all 4. The method she had worked out in a notebook in Covington, Kentucky, translated across every variant they encountered. By March of 1944, the unit had decrypted over 300 messages from the 5 circuits. The intelligence was passed to the relevant operational commands through channels Margaret was not made aware of. She knew the decryptions were useful because the requests for additional traffic kept arriving on her desk. She did not ask where the intelligence went after she processed it. That was not her part of the work. The work itself occupied her in a specific way. She was at her desk by 7 each morning. She left after 9 most evenings. She ate lunch at her desk because the cafeteria line took 25 minutes, and 25 minutes was time she preferred to spend on traffic. The other 5 members of the unit developed a habit of leaving difficult messages on her desk when they left for the night. She worked those first in the morning before the rest of the unit arrived. The unit section report for the quarter ending June 1944 noted that the calendar indexed decryption method had produced actionable intelligence in 31 separate instances over the preceding 90 days. The report attributed the method to the unit collectively. Margaret's name was in the unit personnel list at the bottom of the 3rd page. That was the first official document that mentioned her work. She did not complain about the attribution. She continued working. The system crashed in August of 1944. Not Margaret's method. The processing system that Arlington Hall used to route decrypted traffic to the relevant consumer offices. A file she had submitted for routing, a single decryption of a high-priority message from a Japanese naval circuit she had not been assigned, contained a cross-reference to 5 other circuits that the system attempted to resolve simultaneously. The system was not built to handle that kind of cascading reference load. It locked up for 4 hours and 11 minutes on a Tuesday morning, while 3 other sections waited for their traffic to clear. The system administrator traced the lockup to her submission. Captain Reeves, who no longer ran her section but whose office was 2 floors up in the same building, heard about the lockup and came down to room 14 and told her that submitting cross-circuit references without prior approval from the system routing office was unauthorized. He stood in the doorway and said this loudly enough that the other 5 members of the unit heard it from their desks. Margaret said she understood. She said she would route future cross-circuit references through the appropriate office. She did not apologize. The routing office reviewed the file she had submitted after the system came back up. They brought it to Colonel Friedman's aide. The aide brought it to Friedman. The file contained what Margaret had been working on for the preceding 3 weeks independently: a unified reference map connecting 11 Japanese diplomatic and naval circuits through a common secondary key structure that had not been previously identified. The cross-circuit references that had crashed the system were the cross-reference links in that map. The map itself was accurate. Friedman convened a meeting of senior analytical personnel on August 17, 1944. He presented the 11-circuit reference map as a framework for restructuring how the unit approached Japanese traffic analysis going forward. He explained the common secondary key structure and its implications for the existing backlog of undeciphered traffic. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Margaret was not invited to the meeting. Friedman's aide came to her desk afterward and told her the map had been well received. He also told her that Colonel Friedman wanted to formally document the calendar indexed decryption method under her name in the unit's technical records, which would constitute an official attribution in the Signal Intelligence Service's permanent files. Margaret said that would be appropriate. The aide wrote it down and left. The documentation was filed September 1, 1944. Margaret Elaine Dowd, civilian analyst, Signal Intelligence Service, Arlington Hall, Arlington, Virginia. The calendar indexed polyalphabetic key recovery method. 14 pages of original analysis, submitted with initial employment application, March 1943. Method confirmed, and deployed June 1943. Applied to 5 primary circuits and 11 secondary circuits through August 1944. She kept working through the end of the war. The unit expanded from 6 to 14 people by January 1945. 2 of the new members were women. Margaret trained both of them on the calendar indexed method within their first 2 weeks. She gave each of them a copy of the original 14 pages and a handwritten index she had added to clarify the calendar conversion tables. The war in the Pacific ended in August 1945. Arlington Hall began demobilizing civilian personnel in September. Margaret received her formal separation notice on October 3, 1945. She packed the contents of her desk into a single cardboard box and took the bus back to the apartment she had been renting in Arlington for 2 years and 4 months. She kept the notebook. She returned to Covington in November 1945. She went back to teaching geometry at the same secondary school she had left in 1943. The students were different. The classroom was the same. She taught there for 22 more years, retiring in June of 1967 at the age of 51. She never published the method, never presented it at a conference. The work was classified, and the classification was never fully lifted in her lifetime. She did not discuss the details with her family. She told her mother she had done office work in Virginia for 2 years during the war. Her mother said that sounded useful. The Signal Intelligence Service became the National Security Agency in 1952. The technical records Margaret's method had been filed in were archived through several subsequent reorganizations. The 14 pages of original cipher analysis, the documentation filed September 1, 1944. The training materials she had written for the 2 women who joined the unit in 1945, all of it moved with the files. A researcher named Daniel Peterson, working at the NSA's Center for Cryptologic History, found the file in 1989 while surveying World War II analytical records. He published a 3-page summary of the calendar-indexed method in an internal historical journal in 1991. The summary noted that the method had been developed independently by a civilian analyst with no prior professional cryptanalytic training, and that it had been applied to 16 circuits over 2 years and produced intelligence used in active Pacific operations. The summary had a footnote. The footnote said the analyst's original application had been rejected twice before a senior officer intervened. It said the analyst had identified a previously unknown cipher element during her initial evaluation at Arlington Hall, while officially waiting for her primary assessment to be reviewed. It said the intelligence value of the work she produced over 2 years had never been formally quantified. Margaret Dowd died in Covington, Kentucky in January of 1994. She was 77 years old. The notebook was still in the drawer next to her bed. Her family found it when they went through her belongings. Her niece, a high school English teacher named Patricia Dowd, read it. She did not understand the mathematics. She understood that the handwriting was precise, and that the pages were worn smooth from handling, and that the dates in the margins ran from 1940 to 1943 in an unbroken sequence. She understood that whoever had filled those pages had spent 3 years working out something that mattered enough to keep working on it. Patricia kept the notebook. It is still in a box in her house in Cincinnati. The box also contains the original withdrawal letter, the March 1943 letter from the War Department instructing Margaret Elaine Dowd to formally remove her application from the Signal Intelligence Service. She never followed those instructions. The method still works. It is documented in the NSA's historical records. The 14 pages of original analysis are still filed there, under her name, dated as received March 1943, confirmed as accurate June 1943. The woman who wrote them had been told twice, in writing, that there was no place for her in the work. She went anyway.